Good morning, and it is May 21st, 2020, and thank you for joining us here at Sovereign Grace Community Church for Bible time. And we're continuing our discussion about these requirements of discipleship that we see in Matthew chapter 16, verses 24 through 27. And, this is very timely, and we've kind of geared this towards our graduating seniors. We have several of them in our congregation at Sovereign Grace. And last night, I had the opportunity to go watch two of our graduates participate in the baccalaureate service for our seniors here in Moffat County. And one of our young ladies sang Amazing Grace, did a fantastic job. That was Eliana Suaro. And then Riley Anderson shared a verse, Matthew 5, 13 and 14, and then talked about how that had impacted her life. I have posted that on our church Facebook page, so if you haven't had a chance to watch that, I just want to encourage you to do that. I might try to download that, see if I can download that onto our YouTube channel later today as well. Trying something new today, opened a Sovereign Grace Community Church of the YV YouTube channel, and so I got to thinking that I didn't feel real good about this YouTube channel having my name on it, so this is for the edification of the church, and so that's what we're going to do. So we're going to continue today, and we're going to look today at the second requirement of discipleship. And if you look here in verse 24, let's just read that very quickly. Matthew 16:24. Then Jesus said to his disciples, "If anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me." And so we're going to focus on that taking up one's cross. This idea that's the second requirement of discipleship, is to take up one's cross. And this idea has profound meaning, which has to be understood by the Christian. Taking up one's cross is not some mystical level of selfless, deeper spiritual life that only, the religious elite can hope to attain. Nor is it the common trials and hardships that all persons experience sometime in life. And by all persons, I mean not just Christians, but non-believers as well. Your cross to bear, or taking up your cross, is not your unsaved husband. It's not your unsaved wife. It's not your nagging mother-in-law. It's not your, difficult boss at work. For our younger ones, it's not your teacher at school or your coach that gives you a lot of problems. Nor is it having a physical handicap or suffering from some incurable disease. To take up one's cross is simply to be willing to pay any price for Christ's sake. It is the willingness to endure shame, embarrassment, reproach, rejection, persecution, and even martyrdom for his sake. Now, to the people of Jesus's day, I think we have a hard time. I've thought this for a long time. I think we have a hard time understanding what the cross symbolized, because today we see the cross on t-shirts, we see it on jewelry, we see it on the back pockets of jeans. We can almost use it in a decorative nature. I know, many people that have a cross tattooed on them. But in Jesus's day, and to the people whom he is talking to here, this was a very concrete, vivid reality for them. It was the instrument of execution reserved for the worst enemies of the Roman Empire. It was the symbol of torture and death that awaited those who dared to rebel against the Roman authority. Not many years before Jesus and the disciples came to Caesarea Philippi, which is where they were here in Matthew 16, 100 men had been crucified in that area. A century earlier, Alexander Jannaeus had crucified 800 Jewish rebels at Jerusalem. And after the revolt that followed the death of Herod the Great, 2,000 Jews were crucified by the Roman proconsul Varus. crucifixions on a smaller scale were a common sight, and it has been estimated, this is an amazing number, it has been estimated that perhaps some 30,000 crucifixions occurred during Jesus' lifetime. When the disciples and the crowd heard Jesus speak of taking up the cross, there was nothing mystical to them, nothing decorative to them about that idea. They immediately pictured the poor, condemned soul walking along the road carrying the instrument of their own execution on their own back. A man who took up his cross began his death march carrying the very beam on which he would be killed. For a disciple of Christ to take up his cross is for him to be willing to start on a death march. To be a disciple of Jesus Christ is to be willing in our service to suffer the indignities, the pain, and even the death of a condemned criminal. Obviously, the extent of suffering and persecution is going to vary from believer to believer, from time to time, and from location to location. Not all the apostles were martyred, but all of them were willing to be martyred. Not every disciple is called to be a martyr, but we are to be willing to be martyred. We are commanded to be willing to be martyred. Peter wrote in 1 Peter chapter 4, beginning in verse 12, "Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal among you, which comes upon you for your testing, as though some strange thing were happening to you. But to the degree that you share the sufferings of Christ, keep on rejoicing, so that also at the revelation of his glory you may rejoice with exultation. If you are reviled for the name of Christ, you are blessed, because the Spirit of glory and of God rests upon you." To come to Jesus Christ for salvation is not to raise your hand, it's not to sign a card, it's not to go forward at some youth rally or revival. Now, some of those things may play a part in that, most definitely. To come to Jesus Christ is to come to the end of self and sin, and to become so desirous of Christ and his righteousness that one will make any sacrifice for him. Jesus had said earlier in Matthew chapter 10, beginning in verse 34, he said, "Do not think that I came to bring peace on the earth." You know, a lot of people talk about that. Well, Jesus was a man of peace. We're to be peaceful, peace, peace. But listen to what he says here. "I did not come to bring peace on the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword," he says. "For I came to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a man's enemies will be the members of his own household." When we commit to following Christ, oftentimes it even puts us in opposition to the very people that are in our own families and in our own households. He also said in that same passage in verses 24 and 25, "A disciple is not above his teacher, nor a slave above his master. If they have called the head of the house Beelzebul, how much more the members of his own household?" Christ is now in effect saying here to his disciples that if he, their Lord, would have to suffer many things and be killed, how could they expect to escape the same treatment? The cross represents suffering that is ours because of our relationship to Jesus Christ. And as Jesus moved with a commitment, unwavering commitment toward Jerusalem, the place of his execution that he must go, he had already taken up his cross in a sense and was beginning to bear on his back the sins of the whole world. And in his following him would be millions of disciples throughout the history of the church, all with their own crosses, and they have all borne that reproach with him since that day. Christ does not call disciples to himself to make their lives easy. In fact, that is one of the great fallacies of what is called the gospel today. Your life will not be easier once you have committed your life to Christ. Your life is not going to be easy necessarily. It's not going to necessarily be prosperous. But he calls us not to that, but he calls us to holiness and to be productive for the kingdom of God. Willingness to take up his cross is the mark of a true disciple. So those who make initial confessions of their desire to follow Jesus Christ, but then refuse to accept the hardship and the persecution and the rejection, they are characterized as the false, fruitless converts who are like rocky soil that Jesus talks about in Matthew 13, and they have no depth. They wither and they die under the threat and reproaches and persecution of Christ. Many people want a no-cost discipleship. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the great German pastor, said they want an easy believism, is what he called it, in the cost of discipleship. But Christ offers us no such option. So that is the second requirement, that willingness to die for him, to take up our cross and follow him. Tomorrow, we'll begin looking at the third requirement of discipleship. I want to thank you for joining me this morning here at Bible Time at Sovereign Grace Community Church. And I pray that you have been blessed and challenged by this both at the same time. Thank you and have a blessed day.